Get 5 coffins ready.
Hey everyone, welcome to my guide for Baron Samedi. Baron is a flexible mage in SMITE. He's viable in the solo lane, mid lane, but especially in the support role right now. I'll get to why in more detail after we talked about him a bit. Support and solo lane really don't play all that differently post the 10-minute mark, but regardless, since I have the most experience on Baron in the mid lane, that's what this guide will focus on. Even so, even in the mid lane, Baron has plenty of options for builds. He's totally fine as a damage dealer or a bruiser, and even a mostly tank is fine too, although you of course want at least a little bit of power on Baron. Full tank will not feel good. Relics wise of course, in the mid lane, Beats and Aegis is the way to go. And then in solo, you're typically looking at a teleport and a meditation, and in support you usually want a meditation and a situational relic. Sunder is actually really good on him, thanks to his ability to single out targets. Shard wise, I guess just Carapace, that's probably the best shard right now, in pretty much any role. So let's get to one of the reasons Baron's so flexible, his passive, which technically he has 2 of. Firstly, Baron and any of his teammates can buy Baron's Brew from the shop. It's a potion that'll slowly give you health and mana just like a health or mana potion would, but gives you slightly smaller amounts in those respective potions, and refills upon returning to the fountain. So do you buy? Yes. Everyone buys that on Baron's team, either at the very start of the game or by the end of the early game. It's a great little tool to have throughout the match. Very late into the match, it's not uncommon to see it being sold in favor of more consumable slots for things like wards, but just keep in mind that this is pretty much only applicable to 1 or 2 roles, the support and maybe the solo laner and or jungler. Otherwise, there's very little reason to get rid of it. As Baron and as most gods, just buy it in place of your mana potions, shorting yourself on health potions if need be, but in some situations when you're in a rough matchup, you may opt instead to just skip the brew and go straight for traditional health and mana potions, buying the brew later so you have a better shot of surviving the early game. And also, as it stands, solo laners don't buy mana potions anyways, so in that role, you pretty much have to get health potions to keep up with the enemy sustain. Now for the second part of Baron's passive. As Baron hits enemy gods with basic attacks and or abilities, he will build passive stacks on them. Basic attacks applying 5 stacks and abilities applying different amounts depending on the ability. As the passive stacks increase, Baron will gain additional effects on his abilities, again unique to each ability, and when they reach the max stacks of 70, indicated by the passive bar next to their health bar being red, Baron will now deal a 20% additional damage to them, and that's part of what makes the bruiser build so viable on him, and full damage builds worth some of the risks that Baron comes with. More on that later. For now, let me not leave you in the dark too long about those extra passive effects and get talking about his abilities. In Baron's first ability, he fires 2 beams. These 2 beams cross depending on the camera's vertical position. Each individual beam does below average damage, but if the 2 beams hit a target, the second beam will deal 15% damage, making the ability, when hit dead on, do average damage. Fear not though, because there are multiple big upsides to this ability to get to. First off is the range. Sure, the windup is long, so that hurts the range a bit, but it still is an above average poke ability. And in terms of actually hitting both beams consistently, for me I've always just positioned myself back, stuck it at max range and let it loose. You'll get the hang of the timing eventually, but firing it out at max range of course makes the beams as straight as possible, which translates to making it as easy to hit as possible. Also aiding in its poke potency, trademark, the cooldown is a measly 9 seconds, meaning that you're able to use this ability over and over again. This isn't enough to stop the passive from draining, which has a 5-second timer on it before it starts to diminish, but applying 15 passive stacks per beam is still nothing to scoff at in the grander scheme of his combos. Speaking of which, if an enemy god is above 30 passive stacks, when they get hit by this ability, whether it's both beams or just one, their power and attack speed is reduced by a whopping 30%. So even against big meaty heads like Osiris and Gilgamesh who can build lower power numbers and still kill you, their effectiveness is still heavily nerfed by this ability. This doesn't necessarily mean that you use this ability any differently because of the passive though. It's still a long-range, decent damage ability which pierces enemies and walls, so realistically you want to follow up any CC, whether your teammates or your own, with this ability. Waves too get decimated by the ability, and again, Baron can easily have this ability up for poke, or if your jungler wants to gank once the wave has been cleared. It's your go-to damaging ability most of the time thanks to all the properties I've been mentioning, and the passive bonus just makes Baron all that much more difficult to deal with. And again, especially when he goes that bruiser route and can more safely go for this poke over and over again. That's not all for Baron's poke, he has an even safer tool in his arsenal for that. In Baron's second ability, he winds up, deals damage in the big circle AoE. For every enemy god hit by the ability, Baron will release a heal. Baron will always get this heal, but allies must be either close to Baron or close to the damaging AoE to get this heal. The heal actually has 2 parts. It will deal a flat heal, which heals for the same amount no matter what, and a second heal based on missing health. So firstly, let's get the healing teammates out of the way. Either they try to stay near you to get the heal, or they're not getting it. You can try to walk towards them while the heal is going to try and give it to them, but sometimes they're just not going to be in range for it, and that's that. That said though, this does mean that you can place your Baron 2 smack dab on a teammate who's getting dove in order to easily grant them the heal while they're being dove, so never forget about that either to potentially save a teammate. So Baron's got a heal, but it's hardly a Hell or Chang'e heal that keeps everyone topped up, but it's still a nice little heal that can keep your teammate, but more importantly, Baron himself in the fight a little while longer than they otherwise would. What actually has a big impact on your team during a fight is this ability's bonus passive effect. If a target is above 30 passive stacks, anyone who gets Baron's heal will also get a huge movement speed boost, which also cleanses any slows currently afflicting them. I'm sure you've already gathered by now that, much like Baron's first ability, you want to be throwing this ability out as often as possible. But it's even easier with this ability thanks to its ease of execution and safety. You can throw your one at the ground while running away too, but throwing this ability at your feet while running is absolutely required, especially thanks to the passive bonus if you happen to get it. So far we have an immobile but good zone control based mage who's based around buffing himself and his team and debuffing the enemy. But the abilities themselves aren't guaranteed to hit, and that's where Baron's third ability comes into play. Baron fires out a projectile. This projectile goes through minions but not walls, and will stop on the first enemy god hit. When it stops on a god, it deals damage over time and slows them, eventually rooting them with the final tick of damage. Every hit of damage applies passive stacks too, so this along with a basic attack or two is an easy way to ensure that at least one of the abilities between your 1-2 combo, which of course should be coming out right when this ability lands, will also be getting that passive bonus. It's an ability that needs no further explanation really. As soon as you get it, you want to start chucking it out every chance you get and comboing the instant it hits. That said, when it comes to escapes, the bonus effect from the passive can actually come up. When above 30 passive stacks, the enemy got hit by this ability will emit the same slowing effect that the ability produces in an AoE, eventually leading up to that same route if there are any enemies inside of this AoE. This is very easy to play around, but play around it your enemies must, and that's where the potency comes from, especially when you yourself are trying to escape. Now of course, 180ing to try and land this ability while running away isn't always applicable. Again, as I mentioned, 2ing at your feet is always the safer option. But if you can use this route before they get close, especially if you have someone within the passive threshold to hit, it's over for them. They have to use purifications or expend more resources like ultimates or relics like Blink to try and avoid it, and as I've mentioned a few times so far, especially in the Season 10 jungle. It's a great ability though, usable mostly aggressively and in certain situations defensively. If only you had an even stronger ability to follow this up with though. In Baron's ultimate, he becomes CC immune and gains 35% damage mitigation, but halves his current movement speed. He begins dealing ticking damage to any enemies in the large cone AoE in front of him, and pulls all enemies into himself. When an enemy comes in contact with Baron's coffin, they are dealt a flat amount of damage, as well as 10% of their maximum health is damage, and finally are stunned for 1.5 seconds. Naturally, like his abilities before, each tick of damage while the pull portion is occurring will apply passive stacks, and enemies over that classic 30 passive stack threshold will be pulled twice as fast, as in they're almost instantly pulled in. Enemies who are hit by the final stun are also put at max passive stacks, so in short, whoever gets hit by this is done, since your already potent combo will now get that 20% damage bonus. Well, unless they're a tank of course, who will still no doubt die, just maybe a second or two later. Where to even start with this ability? Well, firstly, let's touch on the fact that the pull duration is far longer than the time actually needed to pull someone into the center. So there's all sorts of neat tricks you can do to both avoid an enemy tank from tanking this instead of your intended target, and also extend the destination of the coffin. Okay, so this first clip is from Season 9 World Champion and MVP Genetics, and he is going to show you how to sort of extend the range of the ultimate. So he's chasing down this Maui. He got the Maui at full passive, but I don't think he necessarily needed the Maui to be a full passive for this to work. But anyways, see, he starts the ultimate out of the tower. And obviously this is because he was just in the range here, didn't want to get hooked, so then he pops the ultimate. And even though he's not in tower, how is he going to extend the range if he has full passive on him? Is he just going to pull him too fast? Watch this. Boom, he just flicks the pull away from him as he's pulling him in. And the thing is about that's one of the reasons why it's really hard to deal with a Baron 1v1. Another reason why he's really good in solo, actually. It's just because, like, if you try and walk towards the Baron to get the stun out quicker, he's going to do the same thing. He's just going to react and flick his camera away. So, really good usage of the ultimate there. And this one necessarily isn't the best example. I mean, it's more of a very bad misplay from Mr. Jeff Henla, the legend himself, but he does misplay a lot here. So essentially this is what happens if a tank doesn't tank the Baron ult. So this is why people want to stop the pull, and it's also to show just the potency of the pull, you know, not to try and force that stun every single time, or like not use the ultimate because you don't think you're going to be able to get the stun. Trust me, the pull will be more than enough. I mean, they're about to dunk a bunch of world champions here with the ultimate, so Boom, Variety pops the ultimate, and then what Jeff does here is he goes in and out of the pole in order to sort of mind game him. Like, he could have just gone straight for it and stopped the pole, but because he basically let the pole keep on going to try and bait him, yeah, this happens. It's not great. I mean, the number one reason that didn't work is just because they're pretty far behind at this point. I mean, not abysmally so, but more than enough for this to end like that. But regardless, hopefully that showed you the power that just the pull alone can do. You don't need to get the stun every single time for the ultimate to be effective. So needless to say, there's a lot of interactions with this ability to be wary of, and plenty of stuff for you as the Baron player to try out to optimize the use of this ability. With that in mind, let's stick to mostly basic stuff to get started. First and foremost, obviously, never use this with the intention to pull someone who still has access to their movement ability. Unless they have a very weak movement ability, or you're able to get right in their face to cover the distance of said movement ability, you are not going to get them with this ability. But that does bring up a good point. When are you supposed to go for it then? Is it similar to the Baba Yaga situation where you actually use the ultimate in part to burn those relics and or movement abilities? In some cases yes, in other cases you want to be waiting for the fight to be well underway. Generally, the way to know is just making mental notes of what can counter this ability from the other side. CC immune ultimates, tanks running straight into it with shell or god forbid purification beads, and so on. It's quite easy to bait a Baron Samedi into being too trigger happy with their ultimate and either laughing at him and killing him once the ultimate is ended, or if it's late enough into the game, just straight up killing him in that ultimate despite the damage mitigation. Since again, Baron has no movement abilities of his own to speak of, and all this does in terms of survivability is give you the damage mitigation and CC immunity, which is offset in most situations by the reduced movement speed. Note how I said in most though, since the ability does still make you CC immune and take reduced damage. It can still be an easy way to save yourself or just prolong your life for long enough for your teammates to pick up the slack and help you out a bit. And keep in mind that you can prolong the ultimate by, not sucking enemies in, which does create a mind game like I mentioned earlier from the clip from Genetics, just in the opposite way. Here, you pull two at once and can tease to pull one target like you're going to pull them in, then flick them off and pull the other target instead to once again avoid getting someone too tanky. This is really just the tip of the iceberg with this ability, so let's hammer home when to use it. In earlier stages of the match, it's totally normal to combo someone and force them to use their movement ability, and then you walk up with this ability to finish them off, and for that matter, starting and finishing off ganks from your jungler, pulling them in order to give your jungler or pop the ability after your jungler has done the heavy lifting to finish them off. Those are the easy ones. Harder is deciding when to use it in the late game. Use it at the wrong time and it's either a wasted ultimate or worse gets you killed. So you really want to make sure that you can plant the pull on multiple targets during a fight. Of course, if you can catch someone alone, all the better. But generally you're going to be throwing the ability onto multiple targets and throw them into a frenzy trying to play around it. This does mean that you need to be nearby one or two of your tanks so when you use this ability, you have some extra backup so you don't just get one shot. And from there you want to practice some of the tricks we've been doing so far and try your best to isolate any squishy target and stun them. But never forget that the ability still has the ability to burn copious amounts of relics, ultimates, and movement abilities by just its presence alone. So don't forget that just wreaking havoc with it and not getting the final big stun is still a good usage of the ability. Remember, using the ability at all is always preferable to not using the ability at all. Speaking of which, some combos with Baron Samedi. 2-1 or 1-2, it just depends on the spacing. 3-2-1 or 3-1-2. Generally, whatever the final ability is the one that's guaranteed to be enhanced by the passive. So typically 3-2-1 against a single target that you intend to kill, and 3-1-2 every other time. 3-2-1, walk up as you do it, ultimate. Ultimate 3-2-1, but don't forget that you can do ultimate 3-2, use the movement speed from your 2 to walk up, and 1 in chase if they have the movement ability to get away from you. For ability leveling, you want your 2 at level 1, but this is mostly just down to the current start where you group up all the camps, and it might go back to leveling the 1 at level 1 if this ever changes. Then your 1 at level 2, and your 3 at level 3. From there, it's a toss up between maxing your 1 and your 2. Your 2 is generally a better all-rounder, but if things are either going very good or very bad, you can max the 1 instead, since it gives you better pressure and can help you clean waves and get out in case you're being camped. After your 1 and your 2 are maxed, and in situations where you're doing well, it just does more damage, and if you're ahead, you generally don't need the heal as much. After your 1 and 2 are maxed, you level your 3, and level the ultimate whenever you can. So that's Baron, a god with a lot of quirks, but more than anything flexibility. Baron really does lend himself to that more tanky bruiser style, since he's easy to kill and has bonuses in his kit which allow him to still deal good damage, but the full damage route is still fully viable and is only enhanced by said bonuses. He's a god that has a lot of problems too though. His ult at times is hard to play around, but any coordinated team can usually deal with it just fine unless it was a truly incredible usage. His self-peel, when he's able to keep himself at a distance, is decent enough, but any team that can quickly close the gap is just going to kill Baron just as quickly. He offers so much in return though. Good poke, good all-in damage, and insane CC if his ultimate is able to run the full duration, all with a bit of sustain on top of it. So playing Baron can be a bit of a nice edge unless you get ahead, and even then, you still have to space yourself just so you can always get the poke you need, as well as be there when it comes time to drop the ultimate. He'll take some getting used to and plenty of deaths along the way, but once you get a feel for him and find which playstyle you like for him the most, it's hard to stop playing him. That's all I have on Baron for now. Thanks for watching.